Everyone, myself Dr. Kumari, Assistant Professor in Agricultural Economics from Ignana University. Today I would like to present on General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. It is given by Keynes in 1936. Why I have selected this topic means there is a increase in the income leads to there is an increase in the expenditure also. Suppose 90% increase in the income leads to 90% in the current expenditure. Increase in the income leads to economic development and economic sustainability. So, I have selected this topic. Classical theory. Before the Keynes theory, classical theory is there. Classical theory is criticized by Keynes. Assumptions of the classical theory. Assumptions of the classical theory. There is full employment. There is full employment. No unemployment. But it is practically impossible. So, Keynes theory is practically possible. Keynes criticized the classical theory. Keynes is saying that there is no full employment, there is unemployment is there. In 1930s, during the depression, so much unemployment is there. So, classical theory is criticized. According to Keynes, level of the employment is depends upon the two factors, that is aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Level of the employment depends upon the two factors, aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Aggregate supply means total supply of the goods and services in the economy. Total supply of goods and services in the economy. The level of the aggregate supply depends upon the level of the employment. Aggregate supply schedule. Various levels of the supply at different levels of the employment. Otherwise, it is a tabular representation of the relationship between aggregate supply price and level of the employment. Aggregate supply schedule means the various amounts of the supply at different levels of the employment are tabular representation of the level of the employment, that is relationship between level of the employment and that is aggregate supply price. Aggregate supply curve like this. This is aggregate supply price curve. This is income or employment. This is aggregate supply. I will explain tabular representation. This is level of the employment, aggregate supply. Level of the employment is in lakhs, aggregate supply price is in crores. Suppose 10 lakhs employment generation is there, 500 crores of the supply is there. At the time of 10 lakhs employment generation, we have to get supply of 500 crores. At the time of 11 lakhs employment generation, we have to get 550 crores supply. At the level of 12 lakhs employment generation, we have to get 600 crores of the supply and so on. Next factor is aggregate demand. Aggregate demand. It is total demand of the goods and services in the economy. Total demand of goods and services in the economy. The level of aggregate demand depends upon the level of the employment. The level of aggregate depends upon the level of aggregate demand depends upon the level of employment. Aggregate demand schedule various amounts of demands at different levels of employment. Various levels of demands at different levels of employment. Otherwise, tabular representation, that is the relationship between level of employment and aggregate demand. Suppose level of employment and aggregate demand price is relationship of those two is represented in tabular form, that is known as aggregate demand schedule. This is the graphical representation. This is aggregate demand price curve. This is income or employment. This is aggregate demand. On y axis aggregate demand, on x axis income or unemployment. This is the aggregate demand price curve. Aggregate demand schedule. This is the aggregate demand schedule. Level of the employment is in lakhs, aggregate demand price is in crores. Suppose 10 lakhs employment generation is there, we will get or we are getting 600 crores. We are getting 600 crores production. Suppose 11 lakhs employment generation is there, we are getting 625 crores. We are suppose at the level of 12 lakhs employment generation, we are getting 650 crores supply, and so on. This is the relationship between level of employment, aggregate supply price and aggregate demand price. Whereas at the level of 10 lakhs employment generation, we have to get 500 crores supply, but we are getting 600 crores. That means 600 minus 500, 100 crores net profit is there. 100 crores net profit is there. At the time of 11 lakhs employment generation, we have to get 550 crores production or supply, but we are getting 625 crores. That means 625 minus 550, that is 75 crores net profit is there. Here we are getting 50 crores net profit, here 25 crores net profit, here no profit or no loss, no profit or no loss. 700 minus 700. This is the effective demand. 14th lakh level of employment generation is called effective demand, where the aggregate demand is equals to aggregate supply. That point is known as effective demand, where aggregate demand is equals to aggregate supply price, that is known as effective demand. Up to effective demand, employment generation is possible. Suppose beyond this limit employment generation is possible, then we will get losses rather than profits. That means 725 minus 750, that is minus 25 crores loss, minus 50 crores loss. So we will generate the employment up to effective demand point only, that is 14 lakhs employment generation is possible. After that employment generation is not possible. Suppose we will say that 16 lakhs employment generation is there, then we will say that full employment is possible, but it is not occurring. So, full employment is not practically possible, which is proven by Keynes. Whereas during depressions, that is in 1930s, so much unemployment is there. So, unemployment is there and full employment is not practically possible. I will give the quick recap. Today I have explained about theory of employment, interest and money. Which is given by Keynes in 1936. That means he criticized the classical theory. Classical theory is saying that unemployment is not there, full employment is there. Whereas during depressions, so much unemployment is there. So, it is wrong. Full employment is not possible. That is proved by the Keynes. So, Keynes criticized the classical theory and Keynes theory is proved and it is practically possible. Under this theory, we have learned about aggregate demand, aggregate supply and effective demand. This is already explained, that is aggregate supply price curve. This is aggregate demand price curve. Coincidence of this is effective demand point, level of the employment or income. This is aggregate demand or aggregate supply price. Whereas aggregate demand price is equals to aggregate supply price, that point is known as effective demand point. After watching this video, try to solve this quiz also. Which theory criticized the classical theory? Which theory criticized the classical theory? The general theory of employment, interest and money is given by. The general theory of employment, interest and money is given by. The general theory of employment, interest and money is given in which year? General theory of employment, interest and money given in which year? Define aggregate demand, define aggregate demand, define aggregate supply, define aggregate supply, define effective demand. Thank you.